All right, well, thanks everyone for coming along. My name's Alan McKay, and as Neil just pointed out, I'll try and 4 times your job opportunities. So usually I start these out just with showing my reel. It's just a good way to kind of get excited, show some eye candy, and jump into it all. I will warn you, I suck with PowerPoint, and I'm just decided to do the bare minimum slides, so don't expect anything too epic. But let me just play my reel real quick, and we'll go from there. So give me 2 seconds.
Begin to show. Begin to show. Begin to show. Begin to show. Begin to show.
Cool. So as you can tell, I blow a lot of crap up for a living. Okay, so like I said, bear with me for the slideshow, but what I'm going to be talking about is how to essentially market and brand yourself and position yourself to get more work. And a lot of this is to do with more breaking into the visual effects industry. So if you're not specifically visual effects, then a lot of this is still applicable, but there will be sometimes I'll reference effects when you can still apply it to a lot of other areas. I'm just curious, who here does work in TV commercials or film or effects? A few of you, cool. And who wants to kind of break into that field? More? Awesome. Cool. And so just to begin, I'm just going to give you a bit of credentials and all that kind of stuff. I've been working for about 20 years. I've worked for studios like Industrial Light and Magic, Blur, Studio, Ubisoft, Activision, a lot of different studios. I've worked in films like Transformers, The Last Airbender, Star Trek 2, a lot of other big films. Over that time, I've gotten to speak at a lot of events, and usually it is about film. And more recently, one of the biggest things that I've done is I launched a podcast a month ago. And so far, it's been overwhelmingly awesome in terms of I've had 25,000 listeners so far subscribe to it, as well as reach number 5 in the career development section of iTunes. So if you're interested in this sort of stuff, then there'll be a lot more of that there. So check it out if you get a chance. Now, just to give a bit of an overview of this, I've written a lot of articles and done a lot of that stuff in the past. There's probably 3 articles, though, I wrote personally for myself. And one of those was called Overtime versus Productivity. And what it was about was more about the industry and how there's a lot of the mentality of burning out artists and working more hours to try and get more done more efficiently. But overall, it's kind of a really pointless way of looking at things, to burn everyone out, get them to make mistakes, and eventually start to kind of work backwards, and it's really quite counterproductive. So when I put that article out, it actually changed a lot of things. It had a massive impact on the industry, and I kind of imagined it would have a lot of friction. There'd be a lot of studio owners and producers kind of knocking at my door like, keep your mouth shut, this isn't cool. But I actually had a lot of really positive support. A lot of studios started to kind of change how they did things, as Pixamondo in China actually started to really look at a lot of their personal practices and what they did and reevaluate and change that. MPC and Framestore in New York, same thing. And it was really well received. However, there were a few artists who I kind of imagined they would anyway, but they would kind of put the hand up like, yeah, you go, Alan, you tell them, like, the studios suck. And that was completely not what I had in mind. So I wrote a second article, which was more specifically for artists who typically, a lot of artists, and this is a bit of a generalization, but a lot of artists can walk into into work every day, and they come in like 10 a.m., they sit down, they get their coffee, they check their email for an hour, start work for about an hour, go to lunch, come back, video games, coffee, a couple hours of work, and then complain that the producers want them to work overtime. And I think there's a lot of practices that we can do as individuals that make us work a lot more efficient. There's a lot of workflow hacks, a lot of things like that. And one thing I found is that by applying a lot of these, just by more evaluating your working conditions and how a lot of the people around you that you have to work with, what their jobs are, if you start to kind of really accommodate what they're doing and how it all kind of works as a big machine, you can really start to work a lot more efficiently, get a lot more done. At the end of the day, though, what ends up happening is that you get a lot more noticed by the producers, by the supervisors, by everyone around you, just by doing essentially your job. But the little hacks that really kind of quite benefited. But the big one that I wrote, which was this time last year, I was in Boston working on The Equalizer, Denzel Washington's new movie. And I wrote an article which was quite personal to me, and it was kind of difficult to write because it was more about failure and also kind of never giving up. But I also wrote it for my girlfriend because she, as an artist, had always had her parents, or her dad more specifically, kind of telling her, discouraging her, saying, you should give up, you shouldn't be an artist, it's a waste of time, you should join the military like me and, follow in my footsteps. And I was always kind of heartbroken by that when we got together, and I kind of persuaded her to go after her dreams, and I'd take care of her and get her to where she needs to be. And for me, it was more just to write that, to kind of show her that we all kind of deal with that, and we all kind of have those moments of you want to do ambitious things, and you always have that self-doubt. And that to me was a big thing. But more importantly, and I won't get too deep on this, but I also wrote it as a way to thank my mom, just because she never did that to me. She always was the one to say, you can do whatever you want, you can push forward, you can always achieve your goals. And so I never had that mentality of giving up, of breaking down and giving up on what I aimed or set out to do. So that mentality, I think, was always pretty powerful for me because it meant that ultimately I could kind of set big goals and one way or another go about them and not kind of have that, that doubt in your head. So initially, I was in school. I hated school, and I barely went at all. I ended up quitting school in grade 9, second weekend, 13 years old. So basically, I spent about a year messing around, didn't really accomplish much, and then decided I better go and I better figure out what I want to do with my life. And so I set a really big goal, and the way I did is I wrote down a piece of paper, where I am, you are here. There's me with Steve Irwin. It's a cardboard cutout, don't worry. But just to go back to this for a second, I mean, again, this is the only part of it that I really just want to kind of mention the core of this because it does apply, I think, to everything that I want to go over. But initially, just pointing out, okay, this is where I am, evaluating what my weaknesses or what things I need to work on are, and then setting my ridiculously unattainable goal of go work in Hollywood. Now, you got to understand that at the time, I was 14 years old, no school, small town in middle of nowhere, Australia, and I had no internet, nothing to help me, no resources, no friends, money. I helped pay my rent with my mom by working at KFC of all places. But what I did is by having set that goal, which I think is personally the hardest thing to do, and that is to actually have a direction. And by that I mean something that is attainable. It isn't materialistic like, okay, I want to get 100K or I want to get 300K. How do I go about doing that? What you need to do is say, okay, well, I want to work, let's say, Pixar films or Pixar-esque films doing animation, and I want to do that within 3 years. By doing that, you've set a timeline, you've set your goal, and you have that direction. And it's just a matter of like deconstructing it from there. So for me, again, 14 years old, it was about picking my education, also building a portfolio, finding contacts in the industry, getting some experience. And again, those were still quite unattainable, but it was a step in the right direction so I could deconstruct and break it down further. Education, I need money, I need to save for 3 months, setting a timeline to kind of step along there. So I mention all of this because for me, I'd set that goal of 15 years, I want to work in Hollywood as a technical director, or I want to get work offered to me in Hollywood. So fast track, 3 years later, I had Tim Miller at Blur Studio. I won't focus on that frame too long, but I basically had Tim Miller from Blur Studio reach out to me in LA and say, I really like your work, I want you to come and work for us. I actually wasn't at the legal age to work in the US at that point, but my goal of 15 years, I'd managed to compact down to 3 years just by setting out and going about it. Now, at the same time, a few months later, I had Digital Domain, another big studio out there, reach out to me as well. So for me, it was a bit of a shock, but it was something that really kind of made me realize that you can kind of go after these goals, and it's just about deconstructing those into manageable chunks and tackling them one at a time and being persistent. So I mention all that because I've met some people recently who are far more successful than I imagine I'll ever be. They make tens of millions of dollars, not necessarily in this industry, but talking to them, like, and how they kind of got to where they were, it's kind of funny to see the similarities and a lot of that formula. And this is something that I've applied to everything that I do moving forward. So I don't want to make it into a big Tony Robbins talk, but at the same time, like, that is really the core of all of this. And going on beyond that, you know, the big thing that I want to talk about is more about building your brand, building your name, and it all comes down to you need to figure out what you're going to do with it. You need to figure out where you want to go with it. So that's a really key thing here is that you need to kind of get your hustle on, you need to build your name, and you need to start to get out there. So for a lot of people, you know, you need to kind of, initially, let's say getting a job, trying to get out there and get the dream job that you want. Initially, you're going to be up against everyone else. You're going to be going into job interviews, and they're going to sit you down and say, tell me all about, tell me about yourself, tell me who you are. And I think a key advantage you can have is always if people know who you are when you come into that job interview, it's a massive, massive impact on what you're going to be able to negotiate, the chance of you actually getting that job. So that's a really key thing. And for you to, and bear with me, I'm just jumping through my notes real quick because I had a bit more to cover than time will permit. But I think the key thing is just to really be aware of like how I can kind of maximize potential. And so let's just get into a couple of key core things. That is one thing is obviously to look at your weaknesses first. I think it's just like a good standing point to initially start from. Basically just kind of looking at, okay, well, what skills do I need to acquire to get to where I need to be? But beyond that, and sorry, bear with me for a sec. Basically, sorry, I'm compacting my notes just a little bit too much. All right, so basically by putting a carrot on your stick, basically having an end goal that's going to blow up your name, something that can potentially get you that momentum, get you that movement, that's a really key thing to have. So for instance, I've got a friend of mine made a short film, and for him, that was a chance to get his name out there. And what he did is he wrote a quick animation. He took 3 months off of work. And what he did was he put that out to all the film festivals everywhere around the world. Now, that thing blew up. It got a lot of awards, and it got him a job working at Weta. So Weta are the people who make Lord of the Rings, all these other big films. And that was really substantial because it basically meant that he got in and he started at the bottom, but initially just worked his ass off, his butt off, and got a chance to work on Gollum and all the cave trolls in the first Lord of the Rings. So that was really an impactful moment just because it meant that he could actually step up and move his way up the ladder. And again, it's just about having that key thing that you can actually mess around with and try and build it up. And so with him, like having that key thing, like whether it is like a short film, like he ends up now being the animation director at Weta in charge of Avatar and all these other big films. Now, whether it is going to be a short film or whether you want to do something more practical, if you're into writing, if you're into doing training, tutorials, that sort of thing, you just need to find what your key thing is. And that's a really powerful thing, is that if you can pinpoint even something that's a quite popular subject, so in other words, something like finding a popular product like, let's say, Bifrost for Maya, and again, I'm talking more specifically about effects, but for you to actually pinpoint a product that's just come out, for instance, that you can kind of jump on the coattails on, because that's something that everyone's going to be interested in, and for you to be able to jump on and start to talk that up, to be able to learn it, first of all, you're going to be in high demand for everyone else. They want to hire you because if you position yourself as a specialist on that product, that's going to give you a lot of clout. Now, at the same time, let's say that you do write these articles, you can start to get that momentum, get speaking gigs, that sort of thing. So it can be really beneficial to do that. Now, at the same time, working like overseas can be something that really can help build your career up. So in other words, going overseas, to do a quick gig, something like that. Initially, getting that experience overseas is great, but also while you're visiting cities, whether it's New York or LA or somewhere in your domestic city, you can actually get a lot of experience, both locally and domestically, like going over to LA, coming back to Australia, that sort of thing. You can get a lot of momentum from that. Sorry, bear with me. I kind of messed up by compacting 2 hours of notes into one, so I'm kind of jumping over the place. This is my first mess up of the trip. Sorry, one sec. So, okay, again, I apologize for jumping around so much, but let's just say that you do work on a big project. Like every project that you do pick, you should start to look at ways to break that down and use it. So in other words, if you're going to work on a TV commercial, something like that, you need to look beyond just what that commercial is, like a paycheck. In other words, what you can do is start to look at, okay, well, if I do a commercial for Kellogg's breakfast cereal, whatever it's going to be, you can start to look at doing like breakdowns of that stuff. You can begin to do tutorials based on the work that you've done, that sort of thing. But more importantly, like do a talk on it. Start to use the momentum of that item that you've done, strip it down and utilize it as many times as you can. So in other words, putting it on your blog, putting screenshots on Pinterest, YouTube, Vimeo, all that kind of stuff. So having makings of, that sort of thing, a lot of people eat that up. But the main thing is that you're positioning yourself as someone that has worked on it. You're getting a lot of exposure from being tied to that. So again, if you pick a few items, like a few projects, Halo, Destiny, whatever projects they're going to be, but things that you can actually get a lot of exposure from, you can more pick those things to actually get people to follow you and to get a lot more exposure that way rather than just kind of working as the entity as the company you work for. So for me personally, I might pick a couple of projects and like Equalizer, for instance, a couple of the ones I've done recently, God of War, I will break those down and utilize them as much as I can to get as much material that I can use for talks and that sort of thing. So again, going out doing speaking gigs, all those sorts of things are all building up that snowball effect of getting more experience and getting more exposure. So that's a big thing. I mean, initially starting with a website, but going on forums, getting people to be aware of who you are and familiar with who you are. So even simple things like answering forums, that sort of thing. The more people see you, the more they're going to become familiar with you. So the more they're going to become aware of what you've done and position yourself more as an authority, the more that you are able to answer questions and answer things that are going to help them. I mean, I've gotten plenty of jobs where people have simply been asking questions in forums. I've answered them enough times, so therefore they start to look to me as someone who obviously knows enough about that specific product that they think, okay, well, great, we need something like that on this project, so why not bring that guy in? So I mention all that just because it can be pretty useful to have, and also it just comes down to like social media too. So keep in mind that the more you put on social media, you can really use that as a weapon. So Facebook, all those sorts of things, it's a chance for you to really promote yourself. And a good example of this is obviously like LinkedIn. You can do a lot of key things here. So I mean, the biggest thing is that recruiters obviously are going to feed off of this. So typically, I use my entire profile as a big search string. So in other words, I'll put a lot of content on there that is specifically the keywords that they're going to look for. So for me, it may be supervision, it may be certain products or plugins, whatever it's going to be. So dynamics, particles, fluids, all that sort of thing. Now, by doing that, it means that no matter what, you're going to keep showing up in their feed. And those are the key things that you really want to do. At the same time, you need to kind of really put yourself in the eyes of the employer. So again, I will mention this a bit, but you really need to start to position yourself as someone like from their perspective. So in other words, the more that they're going to look at your work and who you are, the more they're going to really be able to, the more you're able to hack that, the more you're able to make sure that you're being presented in the right light. So in other words, having a strong title, I mean, is a key thing. It sounds stupid, but a lot of people I know will put something like 3D render chick or, master of disaster or whatever it is in the title, and it might be fun if people know what you do for a living, like blow stuff up or whatever, but if you are trying to sell yourself to someone who doesn't know you, you need to catch them like, okay, supervisor of dynamics or whatever it's going to be, people are then going to be able to catch on to that and know what they're specifically fishing for you in a big nest of people. So it's a very important thing to keep that in mind. So all that being said, the other thing is like Vimeo is really powerful because you can put your reel, you can put a lot of stuff on there. So again, what you can do is essentially build up a massive list of all your work, everything in a giant place, because what's going to happen is rather than reading your resume, which is very vanilla, very simple to look at, what's going to end up happening is they can see all the movies, the projects you've worked on. You can put all the breakdowns I mentioned on here as well. It can be really powerful just to get that all in there, so that way it's a big presentation that they're going to get more familiar with your work and who you are. And that's a pretty key thing to have, but at the same time, there's stuff I won't bother going into, but obviously posting professional photos, all that sort of stuff. I will say I've got a friend of mine, she works for 343, which is Microsoft's company. They do Halo, Destiny, a lot of big games. Bear with me, she basically was asking me whether taking all of her photos down that involve alcohol might be a good idea, because typically when you are having a lot of stuff on social media, it does get reverse looked up. In other words, people are going to research you just as much as you have that visibility. So what it means is that they're going to say, okay, well, let's look through your stuff and see what you're like and get a better idea of who you are. And typically by the time you get to a job interview, they're going to know a lot more about you than you probably assume. And so she was asking whether or not like she should take down any photos of her like at a party or being social. And the thing is that that kind of thing is not a bad thing at all. It's actually a good thing. I mean, if you've got you doing body shots, with you know, a bunch of people around you in every single photo, that's probably not a good idea. But if at the same time, like if you know, show that you're just sitting at home playing video games all day long, you're going to be a bit of a recluse, and that again paints a lot of your personality too. So keep that in mind. That like for me, I'm happy to have a few pictures of me having booze and everything, because it means that, okay, well, I know that when we're working till 3 in the morning and we want to get a drink because we're all stressed, that's someone I can have a drink with. They're going to be a fun person. We're going to get along. And I actually read this yesterday or the day before. Like Google has started really extending their interviews, where they've gone up to 6 interviews standard, sometimes up to 11 interviews per person, which is ridiculous, but that's more for like a staff position. But they've gone as far as 16 for one guy just to test it out. And he ended up not getting the job in the end too, which is going to hurt a little bit, I think. But I mean, keep that stuff in mind. I mean, it's definitely one of those things that you do want to paint a picture, and people do use this stuff. So you might as well start to paint that persona. And I say that because you get a lot of people who might have photos of them doing photography and really cool, like professional photos, but not professional like an accountant. And I'm sorry if anyone's accountant in here, but you know, you want something that people are like showing their profession, showing what they do on the side, showing who they are. And I can say that like if you've got to pick between someone who's very kind of straight-laced and someone who it looks like they do a lot of stuff, and you kind of almost get jealous, like, I want to do what they do on the side. You know, I like drive fast cars and take photos and travel around. But it means that, okay, this guy's interesting, he does a lot of stuff, he has a lot going for him. Well, that's great. That's the kind of people we want in here. And I have had some pretty weird experiences. Like, I know one guy who went for a job interview, and he actually got it, and then right afterwards, you know, he's trying to be cool and says like, hey, you know, do you know where I can get some weed, to the owner of the company, thinking like that'd be a really cool thing. So he actually still got the job, but yeah, which blows my mind. But you actually know who it is, but well, anyway. But the thing is, he actually got the job, but yeah, he was already pretty much on probation from the get-go. And yeah, it just blows my mind how people can be that reckless. Mind you, I have done that. I have gone into, not the weed part, but I have gone to interviews, and I've gotten up afterwards, and this was on Priest actually, and as I'm walking out, I said to the guys, like, by the way, like, what bars are around this area? And the difference is that I'm actually doing a couple of things. I'm saying to them that, all right, I'm kind of picturing working here, you know, and getting to know the lay of the land. And at the same time, like, those guys were actually saying, well, if you want, we can take you out sometime and you know, buy you some drinks and show you around. And then they're like, if you want, we can do it right now. And so for me, that was like, okay, good, I got these guys. Like, they're keen to take me out, that's a good sign. So, you know, you can do this stuff, and it's a bit more about being fun. And I won't go on the job interview stuff too much. I mean, I'm sure you guys know all that stuff, but for me, the one thing I've always done, which always seemed to be really effective, was always, I didn't go in expecting that hierarchy of like, please, can I have a job? I always came in, I was myself, and I used it as a chance to kind of be myself, but be very casual, treat them as an equal, and it's always been effective for me. And that's one thing, like if you're writing emails and trying to apply for jobs, I've found this to be quite effective, was just, like, typically I don't ask for a job. I don't email them and say, hey, like, I would like to, you know, work for your company, please hire me, because there's a couple of things that happen. One is that some people are just not going to have an answer for you, and if you're asking for something and you're not able to give the answer that they want, then you kind of just don't reply most of the time. It's a lot easier, and sometimes that's how it works. So what I'll typically do is I'll email them, and I mean, this is probably one of the big things that I kind of do, is I'll say like, you know, hey, I'm just shooting you an email just to say hi, I'm a really big fan of the work you guys do. I'm not looking for work right now, but I just came off working on, you know, let's say Transformers 5 or whatever, and I'm currently working on this. I'm going to quickly do another job after this, but I want to shoot you an email and just say I really love your work, and you know, let me know if you guys ever want to grab a drink, or I'm going to be in the area at some time. Whatever it's going to be, it doesn't really matter about the rest of it, but the whole point is that you basically say, you know, you like them, you're being humble, but you're shooting them an email saying basically that you don't want work, but you want them to know who you are. So you're going to give them your credentials, your reel, your resume, all that stuff, so they have it on file. Let me know if anything comes up down the line. It's very casual, and that way they'll feel a lot more likely to respond. They're not going to be like, okay, well, we don't have anything next. They're going to say, okay, great, like, we loved your work. That's really awesome. Plus, one thing that does work really effectively is that by saying, I just finished up X, I'm about to go work on Y, and I'm going to quickly jump on to Z. A few of the guys at Blur actually use this to get their job at Blur. You're basically saying that you're in high demand, you aren't looking for work, you're not desperate. In other words, why doesn't that person have a job and he's emailing me? But at the same time, it gives you a chance. You've got these 3 things that you can promote. You're saying, I just did this, this, and this. So it's a great kind of invisible thread to say who you are. Another key thing about sending emails to people is just by quickly summarizing. I always do like a 2-line description at the top of who I am. Because if you say, hi, I'd like to apply for a job, blah, 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 and then at the very end you say, by the way, I've worked at all these big studios, 20 years experience doing this, this, and this, it changes the very tone of your email. But by saying at the very top, hi, I've got 20 years experience, I'm supervising this film right now, I'm doing these other projects, and I'm really interested in connecting with you, big fan of your work, blah, blah, blah. It changes the whole tone, and it also means that they want to read more. Because the biggest thing is, and I hate to say it, but I get emails all the time too, and I don't typically read the job applications as much as I should, just because if I've got too much on my plate, it's too difficult to keep on top of that. So, I will look at them, I'll tag them for later, and they'll go in the pile, but I don't always get to it. But if you see in the first line, this many 5 years experience, lighter, whatever, then suddenly they're going to go, okay, you're experienced and we actually need a lighter. That's cool, I'm going to check this guy out. So it's more just something to make sure that they are going to read it by summarizing who you are before you actually go through that stuff. At the same time, I always make my subject headings kind of more meta-tagged, just like my LinkedIn. In other words, you want to put in all the key information in the subject so that way they know to look you up. So in other words, just simply saying, job title, experience, your name, and a couple other things, it's more than likely your name's going to keep popping up in a lot of the email searches they do when they're looking for people. And that's another thing too, is just, you've got your email signature at the bottom. That's really good real estate to work with. So that's something you can keep in mind too, is just the fact that you can put a lot of really vital information in there. A project you just wrapped up, you might put the movie trailer for that at the bottom. Your IMDb, if you work in film, your website, all these other things, your LinkedIn. So for me, I actually have a lot of stuff down the bottom. And if anything, they might look at it, and it just gives a quick summary, again, of who I am without needing to really fish through it. And at the same time, let's say if you do have a bit of a, they search for you and a lot of stuff that you don't want to have pops up, then they're less likely to do an organic search on you if you've got all the stuff that they're likely to look for, like LinkedIn, website, all that stuff. So if it's all right there in front of them, then they're more likely just to kind of click through it and go from there. So that could be really important to keep in mind too. There are a couple of things that I will mention too about like Facebook. I've heard and seen a few people do like really sneaky stuff, like, and I don't really think it's the best idea, but I've seen some people kind of apply for jobs, and the way they do it is like you can set up Facebook ads to target specific people or specific types of people. And so you hear that a lot in Silicon Valley, where people are really ambitious and they want to show that how hungry they are to get a job. So they'll practically stalk people on Facebook, and they'll send ads saying, hire me. So whenever that person's clicking through Facebook, it's going to keep popping up with their face with a big like, hire me, next to it. And that sort of thing, I think is more harassing than anything, but it's kind of really immature and doesn't really work too well. However, you can still do stuff like that where it's a bit more invisible, which is, and I've seen people do this and it has worked pretty successfully, which is if you've done some stuff, like I've mentioned about writing articles, about doing all these big things, by having like a little banner ad that specifically for that person, it doesn't cost much money if you're targeting that one person or that type of person. You can do lookalike searches too. So what you can do is promote yourself, as in promote something you've done. In other words, if it's an authentic ad saying, Alan McKay just did this, training talk or this video, click here to check it out. The whole thing is people are getting familiar with what you've done and what you do. So by the time that they get through it, it's never one of these like in-your-face things, but it is kind of a subtle way to get them to be like, oh, okay, yeah, like I've seen this guy around, can't remember where. And again, you can do retargeting, which means that when they leave Facebook, they go around the web and your stuff keeps popping up. And so you can look into that stuff, and I'm happy to kind of give you guys some hints as to where to go with it, but that sort of thing can be pretty effective just to kind of to feed that stuff out. And again, like Facebook and LinkedIn for me, it's been good to just kind of drip feed people updates on what I do. And I haven't done that intentionally, but I'll go to events, I'll go to like a job interview, and people are like, oh, how was New York, or how was this? And it's kind of like, well, how did you know I was over there? And it's like, well, I saw like a link on this, or a LinkedIn status update came through. So, it's stuff that you don't do, but like basically all this stuff is like feeding into their personal life all the time. So it can be pretty vital, just because you're going to get a lot from, just doing simple updates and posting all the stuff that you do. And it's kind of like anytime you do something good, you milk that. You make sure that it gets as much attention as you can, because all those things do build up. So like I said, if you build an article, you post that everywhere. If you're wrapping a project, you post, just finished here. And again, that's an invisible thread, but it's saying I may be available. But you post a link to it. And again, all those things get clout, and all that stuff kind of feeds up to what you're doing. Now, at the same time, like I mentioned before, like if you travel to a new city, it's always great. You can send emails to everyone, say I'm in town for this day, contact a few studios. If you get a gig over that studio, you can use that as clout or momentum to reach out to other studios. So the key thing is, like, by getting one thing, you start to build on that and kind of keep building that momentum. So for instance, reaching out to one studio, get that gig, contact all the other studios saying, I'm working here, I'm doing this, this, and this. I'd love to check out your studio. That way, you're obviously high in demand, you're doing a job for someone local, so they'll want to perhaps talk to you as well. So the more jobs you do, reach out to schools, universities to do talking gigs, that sort of thing too. So all that kind of stuff, I mean, again, it's just more about building it up. You can do like a few even blog posts of your own, like articles on whatever, like I said, the latest RealFlow or Naiad, Bifrost, whatever products. And by simply writing that article, then you can actually contact magazines, say, hey, I've written this article, I've written a couple others, I'd love to write one for you. And it can be as simple as that, by saying, here's proof that I can do it, that this is my writing style, can I write something for you? And by getting that momentum, by getting that first writing article, you can then reach out to the next one and say, I'm writing for 3D World Magazine or Architectural World Magazine, whatever it's going to be, and get the next gig and the next gig. And it's all about keeping that going. So it is a lot of work to do that, but at the same time, like, it really does kind of pay off in the end. So that's kind of a key thing just to kind of keep in mind, is to kind of get that momentum going. Now, I'm going to jump onto a few random things. Again, bear with me, I kind of jumped ahead a little bit here, but so, I mean, the key thing, like I said, the key thing, and I'm going to open up to Q&A in a moment, I did kind of have a 2-hour talk and try and condense it down to 60 minutes because I didn't realize it was that short. So it kind of make it a bit more catastrophic. But, I mean, the main things that I want to get across, and I'll just lay them out here, is that building a plan, getting that plan in action, deconstructing and getting that in action, that's the biggest thing to get started. But whatever it is, I think usually publicity is the best way to go in terms of making products or positioning yourself as someone who can talk about that. So like picking things that are high in demand. So if you're going to go like work on at a specific company, or you want to go work in a specific industry, pick the industry that you want to work in and pick the cities that have it. You got to go chase the work wherever you can. So in other words, if you start to pick the places that really inspire you, that the key studios that you want to work for, look at what those studios or those cities use. And a lot of the time, because like the user base is what drives a lot of the studios, there is going to be let's say London or LA might be a lot more Maya, whereas like some other cities like New York is definitely more Cinema 4D, Maya, stuff like that. But you pick and choose the software you use based on what those cities use. It's kind of stupid to go and pick the software that you might like if you're going to a city that doesn't utilize that software. At the same time, like if you start to look at job boards, if you start to look at places that are posting lots of jobs, you start to look at what is popular. So in other words, if there's a lot of positions being opened up in, for effects, for dynamics, something very specific, character animation, you look for what the software is, what the actual jobs are, the really popular ones that are in high demand and in low supply. So again, you're more trying to find specific ones that are more your niche, because that way at least you can kind of start to own that. Like I said, with trying to pick the right ways to promote yourself. I mean, again, it just comes down to chasing after magazines and all that kind of stuff, as well as like putting out free tutorials, that sort of thing. Again, is the frequency of people seeing you do that and milking that as much as you can is going to obviously get you, that credit, and you kind of build upon that. Once you've done it, again, just like the articles, once you've done enough of that, you can start to reach out to bigger places, Nomon or whoever. In those places, you can say, look, I've done a bunch of the free stuff, I want to do commercial stuff for you, and use that to get some clout with them as well. So if you get your credentials to start saying, I write articles for 3D World magazine, I do lessons for Nomon or whoever, all these things start to build up and look really great on the resume. But again, I've like I said, I jumped through this a lot, but I think I'll just open up the Q&A and to see if you guys have any questions about more specifically that I can answer if there is any. Cool. Sorry. How you doing?
I had a question about, you said to look at the different cities and see what types of programs they're using. How do you go about finding that? Because it's great to say that, but it's like, okay, well, you've got the internet. Well, how do you boil it down to find the information you need to do that?
That's a good point. There's a lot of good sites that actually got a lot of that info, and I will say also Autodesk can be a really great resource because I love how they've got every statistic on everything out there if you speak to a lot of the guys there. But Looking Glass is one. There's a couple other ones. I'll actually, if you want, I'll leave my email in a moment and you can shoot me an email. I'll give you a big list of them. But there's a lot of sites that they're kind of really great for having all the resources of what companies are good to work for, what companies have got a really bad reputation, because what it is, it's all user-based driven, kind of like Yelp, but for the industry. So that's a really good one just because it will have a lot of the information about which studios, which software, what the salary average is. And there's a couple ones that are more specific to that, but then you can also look at, most cities have like user groups and things like that too. And there's also job boards that are more, let's say you go like VFX Recruit. Again, that's a visual effects one, but there will be other ones for architecture, design as well. And I think VFX News, one of those has it. But these websites, what they'll do is they'll post all the job offers. They'll post all the ones specific to this genre, this software. So if you start to look through and say, okay, well, there's a crap ton of 3ds Max work and not that many Maya jobs in this area, then it's probably good for me to learn Max, or if I use Max, great, because there's a bigger market for that. And it's more just going for whatever's going to maximize your job opportunities. But at the same time, if there is a lot more artists who are, let's say, animators, if you, let's say you do a couple things, you don't want to position yourself in one area that has a lot more people filling those jobs. You want to find your little niche. And like I said, the good thing is if there's new software and new tools coming out, if you can find a way to niche yourself in that, and I think that's another key thing too, is you don't want to, like there is the term like being a generalist, or you can be, the jack of all trades, master of none, or you can specialize. And I used to, a decade ago, think that being, knowing everything and doing everything is great, but it really is a matter of specializing. I think that coming from initially being a generalist so you understand the industry, but then specializing and finding that thing, people will associate you with that. So in other words, if you get good at one specific thing and you stand out at that and you sell yourself on that, then they know how to place you. And if you go for a job interview or you put your resume into any big studio that has like HR, like human resources, typically they're not going to know how to place you. If you say, I'm a lighter, I'm an animator, and I'm a modeler, then they're going to say, okay, well, where do you kind of fit in here? So if you say, okay, I am an animator, however, I can do these other things, then you are kind of owning that one genre, that one thing, and they know how to place you. And you're more likely to be able to fit in the right pile rather than getting put in miscellaneous. But that is a key thing. Like, the more you can really specify who you are, you can really kind of own that thing, and you can get well known for that. So that way people are like, okay, yeah, you're that guy, we need you for this project, rather than like, you're a 3D guy, and we'll put you into the interview process with everyone else, and try your luck against all of that. Does anyone else, or you have any more questions? Cool. All right, well, thanks everyone for coming along. If you have any other questions, then feel free to come up. Cool, thanks.